Three things that I learned working at Microsoft so far. Now, I joined the Azure Communication Services team a while back. I have a video where I describe what I do in the detail below, so you can check that out. So I joined Microsoft a while back, and my time has been filled with a lot of growth, a lot of learnings. I've grown like technically as well as like socially, talking to people. I've met so many new people. So I've learned about so much new technical stuff as well. But for this video, I'll be sharing three things that I feel are the most important things that I've learned or come to realize working at Microsoft. So number one, Microsoft is huge. And I guess this applies to any other tech company as well. Like any application that you use, there's a team, a group of people working for like any single component that you can imagine. Say like you use Gmail or like any other, like any tech, any application, like a major application, Outlook, Microsoft Word, Excel, Gmail, Google, like for anything that you can identify, like on the screen, whatever you see, like there's a group of people, a teams in fact, like multiple teams working to make sure that small thing, that small component, like is fully functionable, is scalable, gets delivered to the people correctly. So that's one thing I realized working at Microsoft. The biggest thing I realized is that there's so much brain power, so many people working on like such like small things that eventually come together to make a whole product or a whole application that you use in your day-to-day life. Now, initially, prior to joining Microsoft, like I knew like the tech companies were big, but I never realized that they would be like this big. Like say like just in our team alone, like in Azure Communication Services, like there's like so many teams like working on like so many individual bits that all come together. So that's one thing that I was just blown away by, is the amount of brain power, the amount of people there are in the tech industry to make sure like it's like this all this infrastructure is like running and maintained and like is developed for new things. So that's probably the biggest thing I've learned or realized working at Microsoft, is like just how big this industry is. It's like unless you are part of it, like it's a bit hard to imagine, but for any like small thing you can imagine, there's just so many people working to get that delivered to you. So that was one thing that blew my mind, that I've come to realize working at Microsoft so far. Number two, communication is simple. Now, this is one thing that I thought the opposite of prior to my experience at Microsoft. Like I always thought like industry professional, like big people, they always use like big words, fancy words. They're always like fancy in their sentences and the way they speak. Like they seem professional and stuff, but that's not the case. In fact, almost every person I've met or interacted with at my time at Microsoft, the communication like has just been like extremely concise, extremely simple. Like you ask them a question, they give you like a one sentence answer. You ask them something, they give you like a one word answer, like super simple, to the point, it's like super quick. So that's one thing I realized as well, which is super big. All the things that you would think would apply to like a business in like a professional setting, like fancy words, like using like complex sentence structures and so on, none of that applies. All of that, like it just gets thrown out. It's just like super basic, super primitive communication between people. And you hear like some fancy, or not fancy, you hear technical words, but in terms of like just basic raw English, like raw language, just super basic words. Like the communication is just so super like primitive when you're talking to people that I've noticed in the industry. So that's the second thing that I've noticed. And then the third thing is not being afraid to ask someone. So this is one super important thing that I've come to realize, that I've come to learn at my time in Microsoft, is like everyone's willing to help. So if like, for example, say you're watching this, you want to get into the tech industry, or you're an intern working in the tech industry, or you just joined like a full-time role as well. This applies to everyone. Don't be afraid to ask anyone. Like that's something that I initially struggled with. Like I always thought, okay, like I'll figure stuff out, like I won't ask, like it will give a negative impression. But no, like everyone asks. Like some things that I initially, during my early days, that I thought like say we're having a team meeting, we're discussing like a technical design or something, and then in my head I wanted to ask a question, but I thought it was maybe kind of dumb, like super obvious, so I wouldn't ask those type of questions. So even some of the seniors in our team, they would ask these questions, like questions that I thought were maybe dumb or obvious. So everyone speaks their thoughts out loud. Now this is something I've come to realize as I've gotten more experience working at Microsoft, which is that just ask, like whatever your question is, whatever it is, like ask. No one, like eventually, I mean, no one really cares, they're all just doing their job. But I mean, depending on certain situations they might care, but Ask questions as, like for me, for example, like as a junior, like as someone who's recently joined as a software engineer who's like super early in their careers. This is super important to me, as well as to any of you watching who are like early in your careers. Ask as many questions as possible. Like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. People, if they want to answer, they'll answer. If they want to ignore you, they'll ignore you. But just answer. Like, don't have that thought in your mind that it might leave a negative impression or anything. That's something I struggle with and something that I've realized now. So just ask, thoughts you have during meetings, questions you have during meetings, even if they seem obvious, like just ask them. That's one thing that I've realized as well working so far. So those were 3 things that I've come to realize working at Microsoft. So number 1, Microsoft is huge. The tech industry is huge. There's a lot of opportunities. There's so many different roles, so much brain power working in like to improve like so many small details that eventually come together to make a full product that you see. So that was the one thing I realized, which was like, it's huge. There's so many people working on stuff. Number 2, communication is extremely primitive, extremely simple. I had the idea that it'd be the opposite. It would be fancy, professional, like you'd use like big words, but none of that. It's super simple. And 3rd is asking questions is really important. Speaking your thoughts out loud is really important. This is something I've come to realize now as I've gotten more experience, but I've always been, initially, I've always been like I shied away from like asking dumb or obvious questions or like stating obvious thoughts, since I thought those would give a bad impression. But no, that's not the case. Just ask whatever's in your mind. So yeah, so those were my 3 things that I've come to realize, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this video as well. Make sure you like and subscribe if you're new here, and let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video and what videos you would like me to make in the future. If you are someone who is new to tech or recently joined a tech company, let me know in the comments below what your experience has been and what were some of the key learnings that you've learned. And yeah, and I guess before we end, I have this wallpaper. Let me know in the comments below as well if you know where this is from. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.